Let's dive right into week 0, shall we? Picture Doak Campbell Stadium under the lights. You've got the heat, the noise, the sheer absolute chaos of college football finally kicking off. Honestly, it's an incredibly intimidating environment for anyone, let alone a program hitting the road with a brand new quarterback. So welcome to this premium tactical explainer of the NCAA FBS Week 0 clash between the New Mexico State Aggies and the Florida State Seminoles. Look, for the hardcore analytics enthusiasts out there, this is where we strip away all that preseason hype, we completely ignore the media narratives, and we rely solely on the grounded evidence. Both of these programs are entering the 2026 season with new signal callers at the helm, and while, their 2025 baseline records of 4-8 and 5-7 might not immediately command national attention, when you actually dig into the underlying efficiency metrics, they tell a completely different, absolutely fascinating story about how this specific game is going to be won or lost right in the trenches.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've structured this video overview exactly how you want it. First, the central tactical question, then offensive identities, followed by 3 key matchup duels, live cues to watch for, and finally, our model's final verdict and projections.
Moving right along to Section 1, let's get straight to the biggest narrative driving this entire matchup.
So the high-leverage question of the game centers entirely on Trey Hedden. He is officially the new starting quarterback for New Mexico State. And yes, he's a transfer with real throwing experience, having posted nearly 3,000 passing yards in 2025 over at Furman. But let's be totally honest here. The translation to this environment is an incredibly steep climb. He isn't just playing a football game. He is stepping straight into Florida State's relentless defensive pressure cooker inside a hostile ACC stadium. The psychological toll on a transfer quarterback in week 0, it's massive. And the terrifying part is the Seminoles don't even need to constantly bring all-out exotic blitzes to get home. Their entire defensive game plan is just to aggressively compress the run on first and second down, force you into an obvious passing situation, and then vary their simulated pressures, meaning they show blitz, they drop linebackers out, and they confuse the offensive line, all while rotating complex post-snap coverages. So the entire game really hinges on a single question. Can Hedden process that sheer chaos in a fraction of a second and actually survive it?
To understand exactly why that pressure is so potent, let's shift our focus to Section 2, looking at the foundational 2025 data to establish the starting tactical baseline for both teams.
The baseline contrast between these two programs is, well, it's an absolute canyon. Florida State enters with a massive baseline advantage because their offense is just a highly efficient machine. They boasted .271 predicted points added, or PPA, per play. For those of us tracking the math, PPA doesn't just measure raw yards, right? It measures the actual value of a play based on down, distance, and field position. Coupling that with an impressive 45.9% overall success rate means Florida State is a run-heavy unit built to consistently stay ahead of the chains and keep second downs highly manageable. On the flip side, New Mexico State's baseline describes a much more pass-dependent offense with a severely weak ground floor. They recorded just .049 offensive PPA per play and a 36.7% overall success rate. Think about what a 36% success rate actually looks like on the field. It means constant third and longs, stalled drives, frequent punts, and an exhausted defense gasping for air on the sideline. But the most alarming vulnerability? It's right there in the data. 34 sacks allowed, and 15 interceptions thrown. When early downs fail for the Aggies, their drives don't just stall out, they get violently exposed by negative plays.
Now, what's really fascinating about this slide is the trench disparity, specifically when you look at that line yards metric. Florida State generated a massive 3.40 line yards per play compared to New Mexico State's 2.13. Line yards is kind of the ultimate tactical truth teller. It tells us exactly who is controlling the point of attack by measuring the yards a running back gets where the offensive line basically did all the heavy lifting. The Seminoles' offensive line essentially acts like a snowplow. They are consistently moving defenders backward against their will, setting their offense up with incredibly favorable down and distances. I mean, they averaged 1.23 second-level yards and 1.28 open field yards per carry. Meanwhile, New Mexico State's 2.13 line yards, that paints a picture of an offense constantly fighting an uphill battle in the mud just to get back to the line of scrimmage.
And that brings us to an incredibly intimidating reality, 31. Let's just pause on that number for a second. That is the baseline number of sacks Florida State's defense produced, alongside 73 tackles for loss. This number completely dictates the line of scrimmage battle. If New Mexico State cannot establish a functional run game, and their negative rushing PPA strongly suggests they are going to struggle mightily to do so, they are going to be staring down third and longs all night. And when you drop back against a defensive front capable of generating 31 sacks largely with a standard four-man rush, you are in deep, deep trouble. Getting home with only 4 rushers allows Florida State to just flood the secondary with 7 defensive backs, creating this inescapable trap of incredibly tight throwing windows for a brand new quarterback.
All right, moving from the macro offensive identities, let's zoom in on the micro level in Section 3. These are the 3 specific unit battles that will actually decide this game on the tactical board.
Our first duel zeroes right in on New Mexico State's quarterback Trey Hedden against that terrifying Florida State front 7. The Seminoles boast an 11% baseline front 7 havoc rate. Now, what does that actually mean for you watching at home? It means that on literally 1 out of every 10 plays, Florida State's defense is creating a tackle for loss, forcing a fumble, or tipping a pass. Hedden's margin for error is razor thin. His success translating to this level depends entirely on his ability to neutralize that havoc with a rapid, quick game plan. He simply will not have the time to sit back in the pocket and wait for deep developing routes to uncover. He needs decisive rhythm throws. We're talking quick outs, stick concepts, getting the ball out of his hands in under 2.5 seconds to his running backs. The critical live cue here is his third down distance. If he's consistently facing 3rd and 7 or more, Florida State's sack and turnover risk will absolutely skyrocket, and the Aggies' offense will completely flatline.
And this brilliantly illustrates the other side of the ball, where the trench warfare is equally brutal. We have Florida State's offensive line and running backs going head-to-head against New Mexico State's interior defenders, specifically those returning linebackers Son Alapiu and Torrey Geathers. FSU comes in with an elite 50.1% rushing success rate and an incredibly low 12.9% stuff rate, meaning their backs almost never get tackled behind the line. Meanwhile, the Aggies have a 19.5% defensive stuff rate. This is a massive physical mismatch. Alapiu and Geathers absolutely must defeat blocks right at the line of scrimmage. If Florida State's huge offensive linemen are successfully executing double teams, moving the interior defensive line, and freely climbing to the second level, it's pretty much game over. If those Aggie linebackers are forced to make tackles 4 or 5 yards downfield while backpedaling, it won't even matter what coverage is called. The Seminoles will simply bully their way to early down efficiency and dictate the entire play script.
The third matchup to watch is Florida State's official quarterback representative, Ashton Daniels, attacking the Aggies' secondary by throwing to perimeter targets like the massive 6'6", 230-pound receiver, Deuce Robinson. New Mexico State allowed a very generous 42.7% passing success rate and a 0.262 defensive passing PPA. Because Florida State's passing efficiency was strongest in high-value situations, Daniels really doesn't need to force some kind of vertical passing showcase in Week 0 just to prove a point. He can systematically exploit intermediate windows off run action, take exactly what the defense gives him, and just utilize Robinson's massive frame. Honestly, throwing a jump ball to a 6'6", 230-pound receiver in the red zone is basically like throwing a lob to a power forward in basketball. There's just no defense for it. The Aggies' secondary is going to struggle immensely to match up physically, allowing Florida State to win on the perimeter with sheer size.
Now that we know the critical unit duels, let's shift in Section 4 to the situational foresight you'll need to accurately interpret the live game scripts as they actually unfold on the field.
You can learn almost everything you need to know about how this game will go right in the first quarter. Pay close attention to Florida State's non-garbage drives early on. Are they achieving rushing success on first down? Are they avoiding negative runs? And remember, a negative run doesn't just mean a tackle for loss. It's any run that puts the offense behind schedule and off track. If FSU keeps those to a maximum of 1 per drive, their line yard advantage is undeniably real. On the other sideline, watch Hedden's response when Florida State inevitably changes the coverage picture right after the snap. If he correctly identifies the pressure, checks down to his hot routes, and avoids taking sacks, well, New Mexico State has a pulse. But if you're watching this game and the Aggies are forced into 2 early 3rd and 7+ situations in their first 2 drives, especially if those are created by run stuffs, go ahead and grab your popcorn, because Florida State's pass rush is about to pin its ears back and violently validate all of their pregame defensive advantages.
Let's move to the macro view and see how this builds into 3 potential game states to monitor. First, if Florida State establishes an early lead, expect them to absolutely feast on a heavier run and play action diet. This sustainably bleeds the clock, reduces Ashton Daniels' dropbacks, forces New Mexico State into obvious passing downs, and makes an Aggie comeback highly volatile. Second, if New Mexico State miraculously grabs an early lead through sustained drives, Florida State will be forced to rely much more heavily on Daniels making intermediate throws against coverage, which naturally increases the leverage and impact of any potential turnovers. Finally, if we somehow find ourselves in a tied or one-score game entering the fourth quarter, you can essentially throw total yardage right out the window. Because modern FBS overtime rules remove a final draw outcome and force aggressive play, every single fourth down conversion attempt and red zone decision will absolutely dominate the predictive value of the game's final 15 minutes.
Which brings us to our clinical finish in Section 5, where we strip away all the emotion and outline the expected points and win probabilities based strictly on the math.
The predictive model paints a very stark, unforgiving picture here. We are looking at a commanding 91% win probability for Florida State, leaving New Mexico State with just a 9% chance of an upset and a tiny 2% probability of this heading to overtime. Now, a 91% probability is a massive number for any FBS matchup. This overwhelming advantage is entirely driven by Florida State's baseline efficiency edge. They simply do far more with their opportunities, averaging nearly 4 points every single time they cross into scoring territory. New Mexico State's pass-heavy, inefficient approach creates a really hard mathematical ceiling on their win probability. They simply lack the foundational consistency required to string together enough positive plays against a defensive front of this elite caliber.
When we translate that efficiency advantage into raw points, the model projects a final score of Florida State 38, New Mexico State 13. The expected possession patterns suggest Florida State will generate roughly 5.0 scoring opportunities in this game, and they convert a remarkably high share of those trips into touchdowns thanks to their 75% power success rate in the red area. Practically speaking, when the field shrinks, Florida State just bullies their way into the end zone. Conversely, New Mexico State is projected for only about 2.6 scoring opportunities. Without a reliable run game to lean on, the negative play risk for the Aggies is just way too high to expect them to string together the sustained touchdown drives or finish them efficiently in the red zone that are needed to match Florida State's relentless pace on the scoreboard.
So, the crucial point we have to make here as hardcore analytics followers is to establish a caveat. We always respect the boundaries of the data. These figures are model estimates derived directly from 2025 completed season quantitative baselines. They are not observed 2026 data, they are absolutely not guaranteed outcomes, and they are not verified market prices. We are dealing heavily with Week 0 variance here. Week 0 is completely notorious across college football for messy play, missed tackles, busted coverages, and pure chaos. Furthermore, both of these offenses have consequential, completely unproven quarterback changes, which means we really must intelligently discount the baseline advantages slightly to account for the great unknown of the opening kickoff.
Which leaves us with the ultimate tension heading into Saturday night in Tallahassee. The data overwhelmingly favors the home team for sure, but football is played on the grass, not on a spreadsheet. Will Florida State's brutal trench dominance perfectly dictate the game script just as the baseline metrics suggest? Or can New Mexico State's new signal caller, armed with a sharp, disciplined, quick game plan, manage to neutralize the pressure, avoid the negative plays, and somehow completely rewrite the math? We've given you the definitive tactical blueprint. Now all that's left to do is grab a seat and let's watch the data unfold on the gridiron. Enjoy the game.